what I did. And I feel like my work as a therapist informs my work as a writer, meaning I think that when you are faced with the human condition every day, you become a better writer, even if you're not writing about anything to do with therapy. And I think that my work as a writer informs my work as a therapist, because I don't know how many of you have seen my TED Talk, but my TED Talk is all about how the stories that we tell ourselves really affect our lives. And so if we can change our stories, we can change our lives. And what I do as a therapist is mostly, I might be sitting in a therapist chair, but I feel like what I'm really doing is I'm stealthily being an editor, where I'm helping people to rewrite their stories. They come in, we're all unreliable narrators. We all tell our stories from a particular perspective that isn't the full picture. And we're all so sure that we are telling the story completely accurately and comprehensively, and we're not. And so I help people to see their blind spots. I help people to see other versions of the story, because when people come in, they can't get to the next chapter in their story. They're stuck somehow. They just, the protagonist is going in circles instead of moving forward. So I feel like my writing and my therapy very much inform one another. I don't know if you have heard the podcast, but basically I feel like the extensions of the book are the Atlantic column that I write every week, the Dear Therapist column. And then there's the podcast, which sort of takes the book and the column a little bit farther, which is that we have people on, they write in letters. I do it with a co-host, Guy Winch, who also, you may have heard his TED Talks, and he is a psychologist in New York. And we discuss the cases, so you hear us discussing them, and then great. We bring people on for the session, right? And then we give them, at the end of the session, we give them actionable homework that they have to complete within a week, and then they come back and tell us how it went. So
why do you think your book has resonated with so many people, and did it surprise you, the success with it?
Well, it did, in a certain way. So for those of you who read the book, you know that it was the result of not writing two other books, the How to Let Kid in Therapy and the Miserable Depression-Inducing Happiness book. And so when I decided to write this one, everyone said, "Oh, no one's going to read that. Like, no one's going to read, people sitting in a room and talking." and I said, okay, well, for the, and so I had these like 4 patients that I was following, and then I'm the 5th patient, because I say at the beginning of the book that my most significant credential is that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race, that I know what it's like to be a person in the world. I know what it's like to struggle. And so I really thought that was important. And so I was very unself-conscious about it, because everyone said no one's going to read it. So I thought, for the 3 people who read it, it'll be really useful. So I really believed in the book, but everyone said no one's going to read it. So I wrote the book that I wanted to write, and I turned it into my publisher, and they started passing it around, and they said I cried and I laughed, and I gave it to my sister and my mother and my best friend. And so I thought, well, maybe 300 people will read it, or 3,000, whatever it is. And I had this moment of hesitation where I thought, maybe I should clean myself up a little bit, right? Because now it's not just those 3 people. And I didn't clean myself up. And you asked, why do I think so many people have responded to the book? And I think that it's because it's very real. And I think that we can see ourselves in every single one of these people, right? So, when you first meet these people, you might think, I don't have anything in common with that person, or my life is so different from that person's life, or I don't relate to that person. And I think by the end of the book, we can all find little pieces of ourselves in every single person. And I think that that's, one of those sort of main themes of the book, is that we're all more the same than we are different. And so what I think the book accomplishes is that if you say to somebody, you're like this, or you do this, most of us will say, no, I'm not. No, I don't. We get really defensive. But if you read somebody else's story and you recognize yourself in them, you learn so much about yourself. And so I think that people use this book in different ways, but I think, partly they read it because it moves them emotionally. It really touches them and reminds them of people in their own lives or themselves. And I think the other piece is that people learn a lot about themselves, just about psychology, from the book.
Absolutely. We were talking about that earlier too. For so many people, understanding the approach more from a therapist standpoint, but also realizing we had all related to different different characters. And we were all kind of going around talking about who we responded to the most. So you had John, Julie, Charlotte, and Rita. Now I want to ask, are these actual individual stories or were they more collective? That's part one of the question. And part two is, why did you pick those 4 patients?
Yeah. So they are individuals, except in like a few cases. In Charlotte's story, for example, there's one anecdote that comes from someone who is very similar to her,
Mhm.
that was really relevant to that. So I made that go into her story. But otherwise, they are individuals, and I chose them because I wanted to choose people who seemed very different from one another on the surface. And I mean, all 5 of us, all 5 patients, including me. And there were a couple stories where I thought that would make a really good, a really good story for the book. But
Well, the story, certainly, you could have certainly written the book and it still would have been really, really a good book with just those 4 patients. But then what really sends it into the stratosphere, of course, is that you become a patient too, and that you're so honest in sharing your story. And then we get to meet the wonderful, quirky Wendell, and we keep watching how he keeps, it's like you start off, you woke up one day, you're in this perfect relationship, and bingo, he ends it, and you're just, totally throws you over the edge. But then we watch as he keeps poking holes into your story. And then we watch as that story you've been telling yourself starts to unravel and more layers, and we see you find yourself. And that was, to me, that was just one of the most wonderful pieces of the book. And it's so great that you decided to include your journey in that as well. But what, going through that, and with the wonderful Wendell, I think we would all like to have a Wendell in our life, in our life. What was the most important, most valuable self-discovery for you that came out of that experience?
Well, I think first of all, in the very first session, I just think it was the very first session, he says, I'm talking about the boyfriend, and this goes back to sort of the TED talk with how we're all unreliable narrators. So,
Right.
and in the book, I talk too, about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion. So, idiot compassion is what we do with our friends, which is, we agree with their version of the story. They say, my partner did this, or my boss did this, or my, sibling did this, or whatever, and we're like, yeah, that was terrible. We just agree with our friend. And a therapist will do what Wendell did, which is to kind of hold up a mirror to you and help you to see something that you're not already seeing. And so that's wise compassion, what a therapist does. And so, I think that all of my friends, when they heard the story, and again, they heard it mediated through my version of the story, was, well, he's a sociopath. Who does that? What's wrong with this guy? You're so lucky you dodged a bullet. All those things. Like, who wants to be with someone who would do such a thing, not just to you, but to your son? And that was the version of the story I went in with, and I truly believed that version of the story, right? But I think that one of the first things that I say in there is like, and now I've wasted all these years with him, and half my life is over, and that's that phrase that Wendell gloms onto. Half my life is over. And he knew in that moment that that's what the therapy was going to be about. Now, he didn't know all the things I was hiding from him, like that I was supposed to be writing this book and I wasn't writing the book, and
Yeah.
that, and that I was having this like medical issue, and that I had no idea what that meant. And I was really struggling with that and hiding that. And so he didn't know that. But I think that as a therapist, you start to get a sense pretty early on, that what the story, that the story is going to be bigger, usually, not always. Um, and so I think the most useful thing that he did was to really, hold me accountable to my story. And when there would be inconsistencies in my story, and like where I would say, and what a terrible person, like we'd be in a restaurant and he couldn't stand the kids, and he'd say, well, then you knew he didn't like kids, right? So he would not just do I think there's a misconception about therapy that you go to therapy and your therapist validates your story, and that's what you get, some kind of like unconditional validation. That would be helpful, not at all. Right. So what he did was he really sort of held me to the truth.
That is great. And that's such a powerful takeaway in the book. I know so many people I've talked to about the book felt that, because you've really made us, as you read the book and you finish the book, it really makes you stop and think, and it makes you think about what stories, what is your own story, and what stories have you been telling yourselves that may not quite really be the story. And you've also done that really, really well in your TED Talk too. So one of the other things I want to talk about with you before we have to end this wonderful evening is really about mental health. And I know there's still a lot of stigma, unfortunately, in this country around mental health, and encouraging people to actually get help when they need it. And now during the pandemic, it's just even worse. People are stressed. There are people who are drinking too much, taking drugs, feeling depressed, whatever. What are you seeing that's going on right now, and how could we be helping people right now getting through this really unprecedented time that we're all struggling with, frankly?
Well, I think going back to what you're saying about stories, I think that the stories that we tell ourselves about our situation, about ourselves, can really interfere with taking care of ourselves. So, an example that I might give is there's a difference, for example, between productive anxiety and unproductive anxiety with what's going on right now. So, with COVID, for example, productive anxiety is when you're reasonably worried about something, and so you take action based on that anxiety. It's good anxiety, because if you weren't worried about COVID, you would just live your life the way you normally live it, and you would probably get very sick, right? Or at least other people would get sick too. And so that's productive anxiety. Unproductive anxiety is that obsessive rumination, right? It's checking the headlines all the time. It's what we call futurizing or catastrophizing, where you think what's going to happen like next week or next month or next year. And, most of these things, you don't know if they're going to happen, and they haven't happened yet, but you don't even know if they would happen, right? So it's not really a good use of your time, because does it make you change your behavior in any way? Whereas, productive anxiety says, okay, I'm going to wear a mask. I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to do concrete things with that because of that anxiety. The rumination does not motivate you to do anything that is good for you or that protects you in any way. So we're so concerned about protecting our physical immune systems, but we need to be much more concerned right now, or equally concerned, I should say, because we are taking care of our physical immune systems. We need to pay equal attention to our psychological immune systems. And how can we bolster them, right, instead of weakening them? And so that checking the headlines, that's all the time. Like, do you get the news once a day? Fine. But you don't need to check the headlines all the time. And then when you get the news, do you go into this future state of anxiety, or can you just stay present and say, okay, that's the news. Here I am right now, and I'm safe right now. And I think the other thing is being able to take care of your psychological immune system. You want to do the things that are healthy. So are you getting enough sleep? Are you connecting with people? Are you what people do when they don't want to feel their feelings is they end up with, it's like too much food, too much wine, too much mindless scrolling through the internet, short-temperedness, all of those things. So make sure that you're able to sit with your feelings and reach out, right? So I think that a lot of people feel like with therapy, you have to be in crisis, whatever that means, to go to a therapist. And we don't do that with the physical parts of our bodies. So we don't say, like, when I talk about the hierarchy of pain in the book,
Mhm.
we don't do that with our physical ailments. So we don't say like, oh, I broke my arm, I can't go to the doctor and get a cast because I don't have cancer. It's not that bad. We don't do that. But we do that emotionally. We'll say like, yeah, I'm really, kind of struggling with what's going on, but it's not like I can't get out of bed, so I'm not going to go see a therapist. So I would really urge people to reach out, especially now when therapy is virtual and it's very easy to access a therapist right now.
Well, that's really all terrific, wonderful advice. We thank you for sharing that. So, what's next for you, Lori? Are there more books in the making? I know you've got the TV show and patients coming in. I don't know how you're doing everything, but what else is on the horizon for you right now?
Well, I'm working on a new book. One of the things that happened with Maybe You Should Talk to Someone was originally there was a sixth patient, and that was a couple, and I did not have room for them. But I'm really, really interested in, I see like probably 60% couples in my practice, and I am really interested in how we are revealed in relation to others, right? In that very, complicated, vulnerable relationship. And so I'm writing about how we love. And I'm bringing people into the therapy room to see how we love in relation to another person.